I'm going to give you a couple of definitions of what I see as blended learning, and also the next slide is going to look at what you told me you use Blackboard for. All right, and apologies immediately to Elizabeth and Jocelyn, I think, whose posts I didn't get till this morning, so they're not incorporated into the list. The thoughtful fusion of face-to-face and online. So there's a whole lot of things that you were talking about, Gary, in relation to the online that I think are really important to the structure, developing critical thinking, and I'm going to look at that, but I want to talk about that, how do we bounce it back and forth? Okay, so that's what I'm trying to work with. That's sort of my focus in this. So when I look at your posts, this is a list of what you told me how you're using BBL. So wiki is student creative but topic specific. Instructor posted videos, you can read through these. Readings, lectures, discussion forums, and I was a bit curious to know, I then had questions, well, how did this function? The discussion forums, but we'll come back to that in a little while. Posting of pre-lab material, exercises sometimes to do in relation to that. Provided a forum for questions and answered, monitored but student-fed, and 2 or 3 of you mentioned the fact that not very creative, very typical, and so on. And I'm thinking, that's interesting. So one of the things that I think we think is that what we're doing, there must be another way to do it, all right? And sometimes what we're doing is actually really good, and we should be just, okay, let's do it, and that's working. So let's keep doing it. And then simulated labs, test, discussion forum. And I was intrigued by this year the students are not using the ladder. All right, so I think there's a few things in there that I want to look at. So I then went and sort of grouped or put your questions together. And how do I develop shared best practices, critical thinking, current topics? I put those all together because you're looking at extending beyond the basic, what I would call the basic content. And at least 2 of you mentioned aspects of this. Self-assessment guides for students to prep for blended learning. And I wasn't quite sure whether this was in relation to how do we help students develop or buy into blended learning, or whether it was how do we do some of the online that then would go in. Examples of novel uses. See, we all again feel it has to be novel, which is interesting. Quality control of student-student interaction. How do we do that? Interaction of diagrams, graphs, etc., which I think was interesting because 2 of you mentioned that. And now that I have an iPad, I have found great new ways to start doing that kind of stuff because you can take photos and instantly upload, and jobs in action and so on. So that's freed me to do this, but maybe there are other ways on this that could be used for this. And then synchronous office hours. How do we use blended learning for this? So a couple of you mentioned that concept of office hours. So what I noticed here in this, so here I am taking your work into the session, into the face-to-face. What I'm seeing, and it did direct how I go about the rest of the presentation, is, okay, I can do the online and I can do the face-to-face. How do I do this? Okay, because novel uses of blended learning or student-student interaction online, this is the online part. Where's the interaction? Okay, so that's what I kind of want to focus on, and I want to focus on from a learning. In other words, how do we make this learning thing work? So, if we look at this, I'm taking off the top of my head. All right, and I talk to students about taking off the top of our heads as we think in classes, because somebody said it to me once when I was doing a master's in education. I just had this neuro vision of Monty Python type where the head comes flipping up, and I thought we don't do that all the time. We don't share that with students. But to me, if you look at these 3 components of how students would approach material, either orally, reading and writing, and where we might do it, face-to-face, solo, and online, the 3 circles are smaller than the triangle overall. So I would argue that we can think of a learning triangle in which the whole is bigger than the sum of the parts. I haven't included doing because I'm assuming that that they won't learn unless they actually do that interaction. So I'm assuming that is there. And a mix, if I look at another definition of what blended learning would be, it's a mix of online and face-to-face, which support each other. Okay, and that's the tricky part. That's the part that requires us to think a bit differently. All right. I think most of us have mastered how to put things up and what we can get students to do online. Most of us have mastered, or at least work at, trying to how we deal with things in the classroom. But it's that interaction. How do we make that back and forth? How do we make that conversation between the online and face-to-face to achieve the outcomes? So I think the three questions you really need to ask yourself is, first of all, what is it absolutely necessary for you to teach face-to-face? All right. So do we anymore need to give students every single bit of content information? And if we decide we do, is face-to-face the best way to do that? Okay. When you think of the knowledge explosion, but our terms have actually shrunk a little bit, obviously we have to do something differently. Okay. So what is better served by more time, more practice, and reflection through the online mode? So in other words, what's best that we do face-to-face, what's best that we do online? And that's really those are the first two questions we need to ask. And then how do we make that back and forth work? So if we look at transitioning, integration and blending is key. Okay, so this is what I'm getting at. It's this blending that becomes really important. So anything that we do online, if we want to really make it blended, we need to somehow address it in the classroom. So I'm going to use an example that isn't my own, but Alison, I think it was you talked about the pre-lab tests that they do, and then they come in and they're working on material. So that would be an example of whatever they've done online then gets back right into the classroom. I don't know if you make reference to on your pre-test, what did you find? I don't know if you do that, but that certainly that immediate link is there. Just by way of reference here, also, I'm going to stop and take off the top of my head and talk about the modeling issue. I've directly addressed somebody who's posted something of use. So that's another way to bring that transition, acknowledging you've read it online into the classroom, okay, so that it makes it valuable, their online contribution. Need to clarify any misconceptions, so that becomes important. Your job in face-to-face, one of the things that I have found is that I learn a lot about what they are misunderstanding. And Gary, I also liked when you talked about, stop studying things you already know, because very often that's not the problem. It's what they don't know, or what they don't know that's causing the problem. So that's where our expertise can come in and really guide that. We also need to think about the kinds of questions, the critical analysis questions that we ask, and I would argue that's a whole other presentation, is what kinds of questions would help with that. And opportunities for doing the critical thinking and the problem solving. So some of that will be online. So to effectively transition, the key thing would be to say, all right, the next thing I want you to do is this, and here's how we're going to work it back. So it's actually a forewarning of next week you will have this pre-lab to do, again, just building on the lab one, and come to class prepared. So that the sense that what they do online is part of the class. It's part of their learning. And what they do in class is part of what they take to online. That's actually tricky. All right, and at first it's not easy for us to make that transition. At least it wasn't for me. So since it's tricky, start small. All right, don't feel you have to make your whole course all about every single thing is blended. So maybe for one course you decide to do 1 or 2 activities the first time you try it, and once you do that, it's actually really neat because you go, oh my God, I didn't know they thought this. I didn't realize how many of them didn't get this. And these kinds of things come up that you then can address much more easily. And I would say that probably more than anything else, number 5 here is important. Blended learning is a shift in how we structure the learning. And Gary, you talked about the importance of structure for students, and I think here our structure of how we do this interplay is really important, but also telling students maybe why we're doing it, what we're doing, and why we're doing it, so that they have a sense of, all right, this isn't random. This is actually a building in a way that is supposed to make the course more cohesive. I'm not there yet, I'm not there yet, but I'm getting closer. And I think as long as we don't give up, as long as we keep moving forward, I think it's good. So one of the other things that you will read in the literature is that there's no ideal. It's not, a blended learning course does not have to be 50-50, face-to-face, online. It's about what works for the material you're doing, your own personality, persona, the nature of the class, the level of the class, the nature of the material, and so on. It's more about that interplay, the back and forth interplay. So assuming that you've decided there are things you can do, you can move ahead. So the other thing that I think is important for us to remember is that the whole sage on the stage is still, I wouldn't throw it out completely, because frankly we do know a little bit more than our students in some areas, not in all, but in some areas. And this guide on the side is maybe not, they still really want a little more direction. So it's finding that balance, and I see this somewhere on the continuum, again depending on the material and the level of the students. So it's up to us to provide the structure, and using your example, you always had a question. So you're not expecting them necessarily to automatically take up that discussion board. You want to give them something. Or what I have done is posted a sort of a type post. So if I want them to take a photograph and post a caption for it and then respond to somebody else's, I will post a photograph with a caption for it so that they have a sense of what is expected of them. So this is the modeling component. Giving constructive feedback, and this is the tricky part with numbers, all right? So one way to do this is you can read through a whole lot of things and write summary, and I come to that in a few minutes, so I'll come back to this. Face-to-face, and this is really important, again, the literature will tell us that it's really critical that you develop a sense of community, all right? And that face-to-face is really the best place. It's not the only place, but it is maybe the best place to do this. Obviously, you've managed online completely differently, but we're talking specifically about blended where it's a mix. They need to feel that the online is part of it and they're part of that community as well. So this trust and collegiality is really important. So the other component of giving you the homework is, for many of you, I was a faceless, nameless person. You didn't know who I was. Where was I coming from? All right. Okay, not for you. But for some of you, that was the case. So there had been no time or way to build that trust or that sense, hey, guys, guess what? Let's see how many things we can come up with and take it from there. Okay, so that didn't happen. And I'm actually pleased that so many of you did respond. My worry is, and I don't know if you've had this worry when you post something, that nobody will respond. Right? And that was a worry, and it didn't happen. So that was, it always doesn't happen, but you still worry. The other thing is about clarifying expectations, and that's really important. Why, what you expect of students, when you expect it, and again, you may need to send them an announcement. I do like this feature of Blackboard, the announcement with the email. All right, I do like that aspect. So everybody gets it. Yeah, I like that. So, all right. So 7 reasons to consider a blended approach. I'm not really going to go through all 7 of these, but I did want to put them in here because I want them to be on the PowerPoint for you. Okay. So the first one I would say is that learning occurs when we use a variety. And I would also say questioning skills are really important. And I don't just mean me asking questions, but one of the activities that I will get students to do is to actually develop questions themselves. So they ask questions. Okay. So blended learning allows for students to access course material in a variety of ways. So they're not just hearing it face-to-face, they're getting it online, and they're getting the exchange between the online and the face-to-face. So maybe online we could provide video, audio, written, graphic, visual information in addition to whatever we've done on face, and then it's probably limitless, and maybe this is what we can talk about. What kinds of things could we require of students? And then if we put a mark to it, does that make a difference? And I think we all intuitively know that, yes, it does make a difference, okay? So the second reason would be that re-examining ideas in a social context. So this concept of constructing information or building information in a collective, or because we interact with other people. When we, if we look at our academic work, where we might, and our research academic rather than our teaching academic, we collaborate with people in this work and we write together, all right? So in many ways, this is the perfect opportunity to do some of that for students, the online, and then what did you work on? So social context in two very different environments, okay? You've got the online and you've got the face-to-face. So there is an advantage to that that isn't in either one alone, if we can figure out how to capitalize on it. So encourage, and you're going to talk more about the student-student interaction, right, Matthew? I think so. Yeah, so I'm just going to skip this one. All right. So learning is not a single activity, and I think this is really important. And this, again, is something that the online can add to the face-to-face. The idea that you can introduce something in a classroom, then they can go away and play with it, practice it, and so on, and hopefully refine their knowledge. And you can, anything that's still not clear at the end of that, bring it back in the next class in the face-to-face. So it's that bouncing back and forth constantly between the two will allow this learning to move forward. So that blended learning actually requires students to engage more often. I think, Gary, again, I'm going to refer to something you said about weekly assignments, the idea that students must engage regularly with an online, whenever it suits them, is actually a very useful way to bounce that thing back and forth, okay? So, and just an example, consider requiring students to post more than once even between classes. And I'm saying that because I have a once-a-week class. And I find if they go and post right after class, it hasn't helped. So making them post 2 different times actually means they may post just before class. Or often I set deadlines, and I had given you an original deadline for this homework to be done by 8 o'clock last night, so that I could properly integrate everything in. Now that didn't appear for you, so that's fine. But the idea behind doing that would be that then everything that was posted before that time could be potentially incorporated into the class. In other words, not, posting just before class. I didn't know you could just post it, okay? Or in this case, accessed. So, okay. I don't have enough time to cover the content. Online is really good for allowing that to happen. Okay? Now, on the other hand, we need to be careful. I like this photograph because one of the problems is if we don't have enough time, we need to be really careful that we're not killing them with content or with the time we're requiring too. And that's a really important component of the blended learning, that it shouldn't add more work. It should restructure how the work is. And I think that I can't stress that enough. Be very careful. It's very easy to post 50 readings for them to do and expect them to do it on top of all your face-to-face. No, that's not the idea here. Is that you shouldn't be increasing the workload. You should be changing how you're structuring it. Okay? So we can talk a bit about how might be some ways to do that. And one thing that I have found, if I really want them to read stuff, a small assignment might be record 2 things that you learned from what you read. 2 things you didn't know, 2 things that were new. I do this with videos in class. Tell me 2 things you learned that were new to you. And then I want 1 question in relation to the reading. And I am blown away, because if you ask at the end of a video or you ask at the end of class any questions, you will get nothing. If you put it like this, as you go through, you tell them, when you're reading, I want you to come up with a question. The wealth of the questions, or the videos, if whatever it is you're asking them to question, if you warn them ahead of time that they need to be thinking, it's incredible what they will come up with. And I spent several hours going through their individual questions recently for one such activity. And halfway through I'm thinking, why did I do this? But as I was looking at the questions, they were so amazing. They were just so incredible, the way they were thinking. And sometimes I could answer it very easily. Look at the answer I gave to so-and-so's question, okay? Or another time I could send them to a link that was very short and very succinct, like that smart book, where exactly to go for this. Other times I would answer their question with another question, because I thought it was one they could probably, if they thought a little bit more, they would have got. I think I had maybe only 2 questions that I would call very low level. I don't know, when was the video made or something, all right? Everything else was incredible. It was really thoughtful, and that shocked me. So in a way, the video and then I posted all the responses online. Instead of giving them back individually, I just posted the whole list online anonymously, so they had access to those questions. So students may get the answers right, but I'm not convinced I understand. This happens to me a lot. Oh, yeah, they're right, but there's just something in the way they're saying it that's not quite right. So the idea here is that they need more time to think, time to work things through. So the online gives us an opportunity to provide them with that kind of practice. And you already know that, so I think I can move through that one quite quickly. And this is about more time as well. So feedback. This is the one that I probably struggle with most because it's the one that can take a lot of time. But one thing that I find I'm learning to do is that not every bit of feedback has to be individualized, so that I can say, wow, an amazing number of you got this aspect. Here was a common error. Okay, so such and such was a common error. And a couple of you maybe weren't quite sure about this. So I've given the class feedback. I've told them the things that were problematical just in case even that individual who seemed to get it right didn't get it right. So in that way, I've given a feedback that hasn't taken me writing on individual things and still given them back the information they need. So I think that blended can do that much better, either by talking in class or by doing the stuff online. Just to finish up, a couple of, I think I already talked about some of these. Posting a model response, so what I've highlighted would be something to zero in on as scaffolding for the students. And this really does work, because I find before I started doing that, I'd be getting a lot of how-to questions. They were focusing on the wrong thing. They weren't focusing on the learning. They were focusing on the formatting, whatever, that really was getting in the way of their learning. And by posting something that was a model, and especially if I had done it in a hurry, it wasn't necessarily perfect, and that it let them be freer to do that. I would add this. When we write a paper, I don't know about you, but I know I always go to the journal to see what their format, what their expectation, what their format, and I think, okay, a couple of you are nodding, so we do that. So why do we think that would be a bad thing for students? So modeling is really useful. And if it's face-to-face, we want to model it, but also online, we want to model it. And then you can the other thing is, if you've done that, you can then bring that back into the classroom again the next day and zero in on a couple of particular aspects that have been up there. So some of these we've already touched on, the online virtual labs, and you may want to talk more about what you're finding with that during the presentation, but sometimes it might just be for practice, all right? Quizzes online worked very well, obviously, as you said, and various videos, blogs, podcasts, and so on. So those are some of the standard things. I think the thing here is it's really important about how you then address that back in the classroom. And it doesn't mean you have to spend the whole class doing it. Most of what I spent time today on was not hounding or harping back to your questions and posts, but it built on what those questions and posts were to talk about in 20 minutes, which I'm not very good at, as you will see. I'm just about done. Okay, so other possibilities, and I really like this first one, creating class PowerPoints. I'm still struggling with it in the new Blackboard system. It worked better in the old one, and it was a great way to flick through what they produced very quickly. They did it online, and then we bring it into class, and it actually produced far more variety than anything I could have done in class. It was amazing, and I really liked it, but I don't have it down, as you know, with the new system. So I put a model. So for example, one of the courses that I teach is environmental issues in earth sciences. So I want to do a whole lot of environmental issues around hazards, geologic hazards. So I look at the literature and there's so much. How do I do that? So what I had them do was I essentially gave them a template, in other words, the model template, and had them find an individual hazard. And once somebody had posted one, they couldn't do the same one. So if they did it early, they got a better choice, but there's hundreds of them. And they then added to the PowerPoint. So I ended up with one PowerPoint with lots of different examples. And that was available for them. And it was the advantage of that from a learning perspective is they had a vested interest in the one they did. So they really learned one. And I always, now I make it for two. They have to know two others well. So they had three. They had a whole lot, but they could pick the three, their favorite, different kinds of ones. So that's what I mean. So it essentially created the lecture, part of the lecture for the next day. Okay.
So they each created one slide?
It was two slides in this case, but yeah, they each created that, and then we could go through it quite quickly in class. And it let me, I could either group it very quickly and say, okay, here's another example of this. I like how you do, and usually I tried, this was only a class of 40, so it's a little bit easier than the size classes you deal with, but you still could zero in on one thing that they had done nicely in a particular case. So it let you go through a lot more. So I would summarize this all by saying, first thing that becomes important for that interaction is to build the trust and the collegiality. And that is, how you do that is an art, I think, rather than a skill, but it's absolutely important because if they feel intimidated or they feel threatened, it's a problem. The feedback I get from students in relation to this is that they love to read each other's work, that they really like to see what other people are seeing and doing. And they've also told me they are aware that other people are seeing their work, so they want to make sure it's okay. So they take more pride in their work, and they also enjoy the wealth of interactions. And they've also indicated that they love when it comes back into the class. And they get that feedback too.